Let's start by going over the user prefs. Text box size is exactly what it says it is. It's the size of the text box in the X and Y directions. Padding determines how much space is between the text and the text box. Text size determines the size of the font. Custom text is the text that will appear in the text box. There are two events. Text box displayed happens anytime the text box is displayed. Text box dismissed happens anytime the text box is dismissed. Before I give you a demonstration, let's go over the screen position script. This script allows you to adjust the position of the text box on the screen. Pivot and anchor location determines where the text box pivot is and where it will be anchored. The default option is center. That means the pivot point of the text box will be at its center. It also means that the pivot point will be anchored to the center of the screen. If we choose the option that says top left, then the pivot point would be at the top left corner of the text box, and it would be anchored or positioned at the top left corner of the screen. The next option allows you to set the distance from the anchor. With the pivot and anchor set to center, the text box would be positioned at the center of the screen. A positive Y value for the distance from anchor will move the text box downward, putting more distance in between the pivot point and the anchor point. A positive X value would move it to the right, and a negative X value would move it to the left. Now for a demonstration. I already have a text box in my scene. I'll type in a few words into the custom text field and then leave everything else at their default values. Once I have a few words typed into the custom text field, I'll need something to make the text box display onto our screen. We can use the initializer for that. You can find the initializer in the Utilities folder. Once I've located it, I'll drag one into my scene and then expand the initialized event. Once I have the event expanded, I'll drag the text box into the event and tell it to show text box. Let's click on the play button and test it out. Let's go back to the inspector and make a few changes. This time, let's have our text box appear in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I'll select the text box and make sure the UI screen position script is expanded. Since we want to put the text box in the lower left corner of the screen, let's change the pivot and anchor position to bottom left. Now, the pivot point of our text box is at the bottom left corner of the text box. That pivot point will also be anchored or positioned to the bottom left corner of the screen. However, instead of having the text box hugging the corner of the screen, let's add a little bit of space between the text box and the side of the screen and the bottom of the screen. We can do that by changing the distance from anchor. Let's change both the X and Y values to 20. Let's click on the play button one more time and see what it looks like.